Our next speaker, you may have heard of in the news the past few days. I won't get into that, but he asked me specifically to keep it short in his bio. But Congressman Mark Walker was first elected in 2014 to Congress. He is I shouldn't never say former, he's a Baptist minister who was in Greensboro for 2 decades as a minister of a church there. He still heads up the vice chairman of the prayer caucus. Is that correct? Co-chairman of the prayer caucus, that's it. And he is the head of the Republican Study Committee, which he became in 2017. That's one of the large conservative caucuses within Congress. Civitas had the pleasure of partnering with him in 2016 on a criminal justice summit over in Greensboro, very good summit where we brought in a number of people to talk about criminal justice issues in the community. And it is our pleasure to have Congressman Mark Walker here with us at the Civitas Conservative Leadership Conference.
Thank you, Civitas, and thank you for all the people who have worked very hard to make this a success. It's always a privilege also to be anywhere with my colleague, Mark Meadows. Not just blowing sunshine today, but I will tell you, I get a chance to serve with Mark on the House Oversight Committee. If there is a more prepared person on that committee, I've not seen them yet in my 2.5 years. He works diligently. We just recently had a hearing on Fast and Furious. We refuse to let some of this stuff go and holding the government accountable. And had an opportunity to have the family, the Terry family in there, who is still working hard. It's cost them much time, much money, and the loss of life, and holding our former Attorney General and this previous administration accountable. A little bit about my family. I'm married to a wonderful person who's willing to put up with our schedule lives, right, Mark? As much like Debbie. For 24.5 years, she's a family nurse practitioner. There at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. She helped launch the sexual assault nurse examiner program there in the mid-90s, and just a dear human being that naturally loves people. Now, you would think it would be the minister for 2 decades that has that. It was more of a discipline for me over the years, but she just loves to take care of people. We have 3 children, Ryan, Rachel, and Anna Claire, 22, 19, and the youngest one will be 11 tomorrow. So we're looking forward to spending time with them a little bit here in just a few minutes. It is important. You mentioned this week a little bit of the D.C. events. Some of you may or may not know I get a chance to be the starting pitcher for the Republicans all 3 years that I have been in Congress. Well, save the applause. We got our rear ends handed to us Thursday night. So we did win this past year, but as you might imagine, a lot of the guys were just emotionally spent with everything going on. We met Wednesday night, had a team meeting for many of my teammates that were on the field at the time, and just listened to them share a little bit. And one of the things that we concluded is that God's hand of protection was on that field that day. Absolutely. And and as I addressed my teammates, I talked about, I believe, and many of us in the room believe, even though some of those that may not really have a strong faith, know that it's through the people in our districts and throughout the country that have and continue to lift us up in prayer each and every day. And let me say on behalf of our guys, when you live through an assassination plot, it's a little unnerving. But let me say thank you so much for your prayers. It should have been on paper a massacre that morning, and God protected us there. Remember Steve Scalise? Steve has gone through some valleys over the last couple of days. Thursday evening, it even came to the point of life and death. He is bouncing back, so remember to continue to keep him and some of the other injured in prayer. We live in a new day and age, don't we? The hate has just become at a feverish pitch. Over the last couple of days, I've had a chance to do certainly interviews and been paying close attention, and I've been watching the hashtag trend, Hunt Republican Congressman. I saw the Huffington Post article yesterday that basically said it was a shame that only one pro-life member of Congress was shot. We need to organize our violence in a group effort instead of like lone wolves doing this. That's the day and age that we live in now. Somebody asked me this week, are you willing to rethink or change your positions? Absolutely not. This should embolden us. We must all continue to advocate for the unborn, work to limit government. But we also, and with our generation specifically, we need to be pushing and advocating for personal and fiscal responsibility. That's very important in our day and age, a strong defense. We also need to make sure that we are being able to communicate it in new areas. You know, Ronald Reagan was the benchmark on all of this, to be able to talk about what it is that we believe and do so with a certain level of civility, certain level of humor. We live in a day and age sometimes where it has gotten very tense. And I would ask you this. I know it'd be easy to throw 10 minutes of red meat at you, but I want to challenge you this morning as well. Are we taking our messages to new communities? Or do we just continue to preach to the choir? You see, that's the easy part. That's where all the applause, that's where we get slaps on the back. But here's the problem. We've got a generation coming behind us that have been indoctrinated with falsehoods, with things that are supposed to be true that are completely at their very core with their lies. And we have a responsibility to be able to go out and share that message in the new places. So one of the reasons that I ran for the Republican Study Committee chairman as a new member of Congress is because I believe that you can accomplish both. I believe that you can, with the right tone and the right spirit, still advocate for the values and the truth that we believe in. It's important for our next generation to be able to hear that. Listen, I've got 2 millennials in my house. I understand that this generation is supposed to live and have no scar tissue, as Ben Sass recently talked about. But you and I know, in fact, if we went around the room at each table, I guarantee you that each and every one of us could talk about points in life that were heavy, that were tough, that you had to work through adverse situations. You see, that is what defines us. It's what builds our character. It's what builds our integrity, and we certainly need more of that in this generation. I think something that's very important is to make sure that we use each and every opportunity to stand for our values and stand for our truth. I am convinced that it's possible in our society to do both. We can stand for those values, we can stand for those principles, yet we can accomplish this through great statesmanship. You see, we have a higher calling. Some of us that represent our faith, we have to think through that filter to be able to accomplish, to make this message resonate. Here's why I believe we're having some successes. I want you to think about this. In the last 2 Congresses, we've elected 240 more Republicans for the first time in our history. In 1913, we went from 394 to 435 members in the House. Never since that time until the last 2 Congresses have we elected 240 more Republicans. But let me also say this. It's an opportunity and it's a responsibility that we get things done in the United States Congress. Now, let me give you a couple numbers to show that there's a little movement going that direction. Right now, we've passed 158 bills out of the House. That's the most in the last 4 or 5 administrations. 37 of those have been signed into law by President Trump. So when you hear that this administration is not doing anything, that's the most bills signed in law. Most of them have to do with rolling back regulations since Ronald Reagan became president. Things are happening in Washington, D.C. About 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, I did 4 town halls in one day throughout the district, and we love our Chatham County people. They like to show up at all of our events, but we understand that sometimes those can be tense moments, and we're able to share. And I particularly enjoyed one exchange when one person kept yelling gerrymandering is the reason that we have the majorities or 1,000 new seats, Republican seats throughout the country. Until I asked this question, I said, well, how do you explain since 2010 that Democrat governors have gone from 28 to 16? You think about that. Over the last 6 or 7 years, through much of the hard work of grassroots people, we're changing a culture. Now, are you going to get press about it? No. Are you going to make the front page of your local newspaper? No. Are you going to get a chance to be on the nightly news? No. But we are moving, and not because we're raising up a generation who understands. We're working on those. But what we are doing is you are activating your neighbors, your friends, and your family because this is a battle for our country. We must continue that fight. Now, speaking of education, I'll talk about one piece of legislation and then I'll wrap up. Something that we're working on that I believe is very important when it comes to our education is returning all education decisions to the states. All right? We made a run at this when I first came to Congress about 6 or 7 months into our first session back in 2015. I only was able to pull off 194 Republican votes. Certainly with Mark and the Freedom Caucus helps work on that, but we're going to make another run at that. The reason why that is crucial is because it reduces and removes all federal mandates on the states that come from the Washington, D.C. bureaucrats. If we can get that done, and I will tell you this, if you want to see success, anytime that you can localize government, you have a chance to make it more functional. If we're able to get the A+ Act accomplished or through the House, the Senate, and then signed into law. In fact, I was on the phone yesterday with Secretary DeVos talking about this. We believe that we can get it done. Then I believe we can see some great difference making into the education system of our states. Now, what I want to do in closing today, I want to encourage you not to stop. Do not quit. We're making too much progress. I think of the story in growing up as a minister's son. I remember specifically my father talking about one of his guys that he studied was Napoleon. In fact, even in our military academies to this day, in many places, there are manuals written on his ability to lead men. He was a general at 26 years old. Very talented and skillful, but we may have never heard of Napoleon had he not succeeded through one battle when he was in his late 20s, when they were getting licked pretty good. In fact, to the place that he sent word down to one of his commanders, to the young man, he said, we don't have a chance in this battle, in this fight today. He said, play the retreat and let's regroup. A few minutes later, nothing. Napoleon heard nothing. Nothing was played. Again, he got a little bit more upset, and he said, get word to the bugler to play the retreat. 20 minutes went by, nothing happened. And Napoleon, if you've done ever reading on it, he was a very excitable man and engaging. So he took it in his own hand, made it down to the lines, and he grabbed the young man by the jacket, and he said, young man, you were told to play the retreat. And the young man, certainly frightfully, looked back and said, sir, you never taught me how. He said, well, then play the charge. And they went on to have a battle, and of course history was rewritten there. I believe if the winds are going to unfurl the sails of this great nation once again, it's not just what happens in D.C., it's going to be what happens in our towns, our communities, on our ball fields, in our churches. That's where we will continue to lead and be able to chance to win. Paul wrote it best in Galatians 6:9. He said, don't grow weary in well-doing, for in due season you will reap if you do not faint. May God provide the path, and may we have the courage to follow. God bless you, and thanks for letting me come out today. So.